Since 1965, the ACEC Life Health Trust has provided innovative healthcare benefits and services to ACEC member firms. We offer a variety of benefits to meet the unique needs of your firm, including fully insured, level funded, stop loss, and ancillary products. Visit our website at aceclifehealthtrust.com to learn more about our affordable employee benefit options for ACEC member firms, backed by the financial strength of the ACEC Life Health Trust. Welcome to the Engineering Influence podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. And recently, the ACEC Research Institute released the findings of its new study on qualifications based selection. And this study is featured up online at a website. The website is program.acec.org/qbs.resources.portal. It's a resource portal where you can find the study. You can find some supplemental material to the study. And we really want to dig into that in today's episode. And to do so, I have two of the researchers who produced the study for the Institute. Very pleased to be welcomed to the program. Gordon Kingsley, he is with Georgia Tech, and Paul Chinowsky with University of Colorado at Boulder. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks you, Jeff.
So this is I worked with Daphne on kind of the not the inception of the study. I think this is something that we've been looking at doing for a while, and then it started getting kicked off and developed. So I kind of came in close to the drafts being done. But how important in your personal experience researching this and studying this is it to have a piece of research like this that kind of quantifies the actual benefits of qualifications-based selection, for not just engineers, but the people in charge of procurement? Gordon, let's start with you and then kick it off to Paul.
Well, sure. So, Jeff, this is an area where there's been so much experimentation by governments across the United States trying to figure out what's the right balance in terms of their contracting practices. And so over the last 20 to 30 years, we've just seen a great deal of trial and error by governments. And so in that process, though, there's been this commitment through the Brooks Act to qualification-based contracting. And that's a long-standing commitment in the United States. And it's been an important one because it injects into our procurement process a focus on quality and making sure that those levels of expertise are brought into the decision-making by public sector actors. And so that's a really important component of this. And while governments are experimenting, they can't lose sight of this important policy objective that has been long-standing in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And Paul?
Yeah, and I guess going to your question about why is it important to have this is, as Gordon said, there's been a lot of experimentation with a lot of different types of procurement. And most of what we have is anecdotal. People talking about, hey, I've experienced this, which is fine to an extent, but you get a lot of misperceptions that quickly can grow and extend across a network of people. And why you need this research is to be able to put into real facts, real numbers at people's fingertips. Here's the real story. And that's the key, is we're now giving the real story to get rid of a lot of the misperceptions that have been out there. And now people have something they can look at and say, this is why we're making this decision.
And you do have some actual, statistical proofs here. I mean, you go and you do the whole analysis, and it's not just anecdotal, but you can come out and you can say with certainty a couple of things. And I think the key findings for the report really kind of boil down to around 5 specific benefits. Really the first being the fact that QBS does save money on projects, which is something that was demonstrated through the research. that you have this kind of perception that maybe QBS, the focus on qualifications results in higher design fees, but that's actually proven to be incorrect. In your research, how did you see the breakdown in cost savings between QBS projects and non-QBS projects?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. So there is this huge misperception out there that if you're going to do QBS, it's going to cost you money and you're going to be behind before you ever start the project. And the reality is that overall, QBS results in projects having much less cost growth than other projects. Just on average, projects will run about 10 to 11% over their initial uh, cost estimates. That's if you took on average projects. QBS projects run about 50% or more less than that. So if you think about that, that's a huge number. You are saving over other types of projects 50% in terms of what the final potential growth in. And why do we talk about cost growth? I think that's another important thing. The vast majority of projects, when you look out over time, come out slightly higher or much higher than the initial cost estimate. Why? Because you have everything from unforeseen site conditions to change
Mhm.
orders. You have a lot of different reasons. So you focus on cost growth, which is really dependent on how good was your design to start with? How good were your drawings? How good was your analysis? How much information did you take? And the fact is, when you look across projects, projects that use QBS do significantly better, 50% better than other types of projects. And that's a significant number. And let me just say why does that happen? People are probably saying, that's great.
Mhm.
Why is why is this happening?
Mhm.
And it really comes down to teams that are selected using QBS produce better drawings, better plans, which enables construction to go better. They look at more options. They overall are producing
Mhm.
better designs that are ready to be constructed.
Yeah, you found that past performance and proficiency have found to lead to higher quality design documents at lower overall fees. That
Correct.
teams that have been doing this work, teams that have that book of proven design business, and have that skill and the qualifications can generally lower the project cost at the beginning. Um, Gordon, one of the things that I like about the study is the fact that you do look back and you do kind of a comparison of other research and literature out there, and you look at some studies that have been done. I mean, what else kind of comes to mind when you're looking at the issue of cost savings for the end client?
So there's a couple of issues here. One is that we have to put this in a context where when we start looking at the procurement process, oftentimes for particularly for local governments, when they look at QBS, it looks like, as Paul was saying, that it's costly, that there's
Yeah.
upfront costs that they have to take on, and so they'll be tempted by other types of contracting vehicles, largely because their human capital is operating at that local level is going to find itself fearful of their capacity to make judgments on the expertise that engineering design firms can bring to bear. And so,
Hmm.
so when we look at this, and we look at other studies, there's a real challenge in trying to get an apples to apples comparison across these things. But there's a real challenge in trying to understand what's the context of these, of particularly of local government procurement officers and the types of decisions that they're faced with. And so
Hmm.
that's a real challenge that we bring to light in this study is trying to understand, well, what are those concerns and those fears when it comes to taking on a QBS process. We've seen probably the local governments are where there's been the biggest drop in engaging with QBS. but they also pay a price for that. And as Paul was just pointing out, they pay a price over the long-term costs. They also pay a price in terms of their capacity for innovation. And
Yeah.
so we have to
Yeah.
keep this in mind that there's a lot of areas of procurement where low bid, low cost types of approaches are perfectly appropriate. But for when you're really making a major capital investment, there's some real red flags that come up that need to be considered.
And I think your point that you raise about local, especially local government procurement agencies, is something interesting because one of the end users of this study, we hope, are those local procurement agencies who do. A lot of times you're always looking at this workforce issue, and you're looking at the threat of retirement from people who have been there and are very experienced procurement professionals. And then you have people coming in who might not have the experience or don't have an in-depth knowledge of these different models of procuring work and aren't familiar with QBS. And in your experience in doing the research, one of the things that I found interesting was how important it is, and of course, speaking to our member organizations too, is that it's not really so much the state governments as it is municipal or county governments where they run into issues. Um, what have you found in your work on this, and in I guess in how those procurement agencies at the local level are kind of what the staff turnover looks like?
Yeah, well, Jeff, there's a couple of issues here that we need to keep in mind. The first is that our country has made a commitment to having our government be more business-like,
Yeah,
bringing in market sector principles into the operation of government, and that's been across the spectrum. This is not a place where red blue have divides. This is a place where we've been uniform in this over the last 30 years, and so that push has led to lots of innovations, but also it's led to getting our governments very skinny. And
mm-hmm.
so we really have. I know this runs counter to the popular American ethos on government, but we really have slimmed down, and particularly at those local governments, sometimes they're razor thin. We've also had, as you just alluded to, the prospects of a silver tsunami, where our public sector workforce has aged, and so now that many of them are retiring out, there's been this absolute generational shift, and that means that there's some real challenges in getting people up to speed very quickly for really complex procurement decisions that are challenging to make even amongst people that are highly experienced. They're highly
Yeah,
challenging, and but now we're asking people that with not quite as much experience to jump into that world and be entirely comfortable.
yeah. Paul, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think I would add to that. I think it's important that we recognize these local officials that are doing this are under a lot of strain. A lot of times you have the
Mhm.
same person who's doing procurement is also responsible for five other things that have nothing to do
Yeah,
with procurement. And when that happens, you're asking somebody to make some complex decisions with things they may not know a whole lot about. And from that perspective, that's where we get a lot of this misperception of people people putting forth negative images about QBS, right? Telling these
mhm,
people, you have these other three things to worry about. If you undertake QBS, this is going to take extra time and you don't have
yeah,
this time, adopt this. And the fact is, research, not only our research, but other research that we cite in the report, has shown that this is just untrue over the impact. QBS uh, does not end up making the process harder. I always kind of relate it to if you're something very simple, like if you're going to the grocery store. Yes, it takes a little bit of extra time to make a list before you
mhm,
go, but it's going to end up with a much better result when you get there, and you're going to make sure you don't miss anything. Same thing exists when you're talking about this type of procurement. A little extra time up front is going to save you a lot of money over the course of the project. And so we have to
Mhm.
push back against this misperception. And the reality is, you're actually helping these people who this is
Yeah.
not their full time job. You're giving them more information that they need to make good decisions.
It is that fight against commoditization. It's the idea of saying, well, listen, on one end, to your point, Paul, someone could go and say, hey, listen, engineering, sir, it's a product. Just, don't complicate it. And in truth, it's not a product; it's a process. It's that trusted advisor role that engineers play. And if you have an engineering firm that has a base of experience in doing similar projects, they have done iterations over something that could be part of a bid for work. They may have their own efficiencies or innovations that allow that project to be done faster. And that kind of ties into two other areas. Really, it's a question of reducing complexity and simplifying complex projects, and then the question of innovation, really, and the fact that there is a strong link between level of complexity with the projects and of course project outcomes, and QBS as a chosen procurement method, um, that does have a positive impact on reducing overall project complexity based off of the success and the experience of the teams. Um, what have you found in the research when you were producing this report related to reducing complexity of projects and how it benefits the overall result? Gordon, let's start with you and then go to Paul.
So the question of complexity is got a couple of components for it, particularly from the perspective of a public procurement officer, and one of them is trying to get a good understanding of the nature of the problem and that you're trying to wrestle with, because what the engineering community brings to the table is not just the ability to handle the complexity, but also to fit it to the needs of the local community that's wrestling with this decision. This is the problem with widgetization of these of engineering design, is that you can do that, but when you do it, you lose some of this ability to fit, and you lose some of this ability to bring expertise in for a complex project, to innovate and to try something that is sound from an engineering perspective, but also matches the needs of what the client has at that local site.
Yeah, yeah, Paul.
Yeah, when we talk about complexity, and we say it in the report, QBS helps all projects, but the more complex your project, the more QBS is beneficial. And when we talk about complexity, there's different types of complexity. It can be just a technical design complexity. It can be working with the community, right? So if you've got projects that are in urban areas, you're dealing with everything from the business community to the political community to users. You have social equity issues related to projects. Complexity comes from lots of different aspects. And when we talk about it benefiting projects with complexity, we're talking about bringing teams together that, as Gordon was saying, meet the needs of this particular project. Teams that have experience working with the community, teams that have experience working with local governments, or straight out teams that have experience working with complex technical issues. And so, what the research showed was, in projects that use QBS, that the satisfaction among owners, among the teams, greatly increases the more types of complexity that are brought in, because the teams are brought together because they have knowledge of how to handle this. And it
Mhm.
makes a much smoother and actually faster project when your teams are prepared to handle these types of issues that come up in the project.
Yeah, we recently had our engineering excellence awards, and as part of the awards program, of course, we have a red carpet, and we invite everybody to come by and talk about their projects. And what struck me was the number of projects and that involved not only the engineers but the project owner who were there at the awards talking about the community impact. And the conversation wasn't just so much on the engineering services provided and the end result, which of course the end result is significantly important, but it was the process to get there and the amount of work that was done in the front end to ensure that stakeholders were consulted, that communities were brought on board, that you dealt with, like you both mentioned, the complexity not only in the design but how it fits in the community. What is the impact that the project's going to have with the community after it's done? And really that soft portion of the engineering process, which is the actual, stakeholder engagement, was critically important to the success of the end result, which is something that you don't get if you try to widgetize the engineering services. You just try to treat it as another part of the process. You're not going to get that other advisory service that is critical for project success. Um, let's also look at the innovation side of things, because this is something else which I think is, might not readily be thought of. But when you're looking at levels of innovation that occur through QBS, because you're bringing on qualified professionals to talk about, to work with a community or an organization to fix a challenging problem. You know, if you have a creative team of people with experience and qualifications behind them, they might be able to lead to a more innovative solution. So in your research, what did you find about the tie between QBS and innovation?
Yeah,
Paul?
I'll start and then Gordon can pick that up. Yeah, we found very clearly that when in QBS projects, because you were bringing a team together that was experienced in this type of project, they brought significantly more innovation more often than if you just went out to sort of bid type
Mm-hmm.
situation. And in fact, in many cases, we found the team brought innovations and ideas to the project before they even officially got started. And so that led to whether the project eventually used those innovations or not. The conversation was there from the very beginning
Mm-hmm.
about options that could be considered.
Mhm. Yeah, and building off of that, Jeff, once a community, I'm thinking about this again from that local perspective. Once a
Mm-hmm.
community has identified a particular area of need, there it is very hard for that community then to project forward what are all the specifications and components that could be brought together. One of the things I would suggest that comes out of our research is that the QBS process is a much more transparent process
Mm-hmm.
about the types of expertise that you're going to have at the table, and also the needs of the contract that are set forth in the contracting process gets that team of people engaged with what are some of the possibilities. And so whether your problem is a sustainability problem, whether your problem is an inclusion and an equity issue, whether it's a service issue that's trying to reach out to disparate communities. All of these things are the typical type of thing that a local government has to wrestle with and be concerned about, and that is a high demand issue. But high demand does not always have to be matched by high costs. It's in that innovation that where you get these teams coming up with ideas that can fit the needs of the community.
That's where you identify efficiencies. That's where you identify ways to balance costs or reevaluate needs based off of budget, and it gives you that added flexibility without question. I really do think that it's important for our member organizations, of course, at the states, our 52 state and metro member organizations, use this report because it helps educate of course, the state and local agencies about the importance of QBS. I mean, as we know from the Brooks Act, if you're dealing with federal money, if it's federal transit money or federal highways money, then QBS by statute should be followed, but it's not 100% throughout the states. That's I kind of want to kind of close off the conversation there on the state of QBS around the country. Aside from the federal government and federal money used for infrastructure projects, I mean, what is the lay of the land right now among the states? And to your knowledge, if you can drill down even more on how many are actively using QBS.
Well, there's a couple of things. This varies from one policy domain to another. So
Yes.
we see pretty high coverage using QBS in the transportation sector, where there's strong and long lasting collaborations between the federal government and state governments. But when you get into other policy domains, they don't necessarily have the same types of coverage. The other thing you're seeing is that state governments have been highly innovative in their contracting processes, and that creates a very confusing environment for folks to know, well, am I doing QBS or am I not doing QBS? And so that's a very difficult landscape for people to know when they're actually engaged in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it, Gordon. Because I mean, Jeff, if you look at it just on paper, right, almost all states have on the books essentially a mini Brooks type
Yeah.
requirement. The issue, though, is that very few states, when you ask them who's in charge of enforcing this, that someone can actually point and say, if we don't do this, here's what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a gap between what's on the books and what's actually enforced. Now, in some states, it was very interesting as we were doing our case studies, and I would ask them, well, what happens if somebody doesn't use QBS? And I'd get a response of, well, somebody wouldn't even think about not using it, right? That's one extreme. But then you have the other extreme where you ask the same question, and the person will say, I don't know, we have no idea who would even enforce that. So
Yeah.
there's a wide range, which is the challenge out there. That's the next step of really putting QBS into action across the board again, is we've got to not only educate people of what the advantages are, we've got to make sure that it's enforced, and we've got to push back against some of this misinformation that
Mm-hmm.
it's going to cost you more money. Because in reality, in the long run, you're going to have better projects.
Yeah.
And we just need to go back to, this is the fundamental. It's the law, and it's the law because you end up with better projects. And that's really the bottom line.
And that really is the importance of this piece of research. I think that this is another um, addition to the library of research that underscores the importance of QBS and why it's so necessary for state and localities to use it. Because at the end result is, I mean, you're dealing, especially in public sector, you're dealing with scarce taxpayer money, and all the things that you listed out, between the driving down costs, improving delivery timetables, the transparency is also key because people want to know what they're paying for. All come together to make QBS the most attractive option. So I really do, recommend that everyone go up to the resource portal, because not only is the study there, but as you said, you have case studies that are part and parcel with this report that do show in each segment that we discussed, actual proof of delivery of projects that did save money, did save time, did drive innovation, and use that with your local procurement people and your end clients, and educate them. It's they're all there for you. We have even have an infographic. We've got some supplemental materials that'll help you make that case. Because Paul, I do think that you're absolutely right. It's that next step of getting everyone on board and understanding how to best implement QBS if they're not already doing so. anything else that we're kind of missing here? I mean, Gordon, I mean, we covered a lot of ground, but is there anything else that you want to make sure our audience knows?
Jeff, we have covered it for the most part. I would say that when Paul and I approached this research, we did this with a lot of sympathy for both the engineering design community, but also the folks that are in the procurement community, because this is a really tough challenge, and it's a confusing time when it comes to thinking through how should we go about pursuing these large, complex projects on behalf of the citizens of our communities. And so this is an issue that people get interestingly very intense about, but all sides are trying to pursue some end good. And I think a little education on this part could help soothe some of those waters or calm some of those waters on this issue.
And Paul, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I would say, I think Gordon put it well, that if somebody's trying to tell you to do a different type of procurement and it sounds really, really good, we always need to remember if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is not true. And I think that's a real fundamental with this is there's QBS has been proven over time to produce the results that people need, whether it's at a federal, state, or local level. And we need to just keep doing that because this is what creates good projects. And with a little research, with a little understanding, you're going to find the benefit.
Well put, both of you. Gordon Kingsley, Paul Chinowsky, thank you for coming on the show today. And again, you can go right to actually the ACEC Research Institute.org and find the study and a link to the resource portal. And do really recommend that you check that out. But a really good conversation on QBS. I know there's a lot more to talk about. Hopefully, as we work on getting this information out there and start hearing back from our member organizations on the reception that is getting that they're hearing with procurement people, we can have you back on and talk about some of the issues that are raised. But these are it's been a great conversation, and I really thank you both for joining us.
Well,
Thanks,
you,
Jeff.
And again, this has been Engineering Influence, a podcast from the American Council of Engineering Companies. We will see you next time.